Okay, so welcome to the webinar on harnessing the community to fund your social mission from the Wales Co-operative Centre and Local Giving. To introduce myself, my name is Claudia Limpert and I work for the Wales Co-operative Centre.
And I'm Lauren Swain and I work for Local Giving. So today we're going to be doing an introduction to start with to make sure that you're aware of what the basics around community shares and online fundraising are, and then we'll go into specifics and how you can succeed at both of those forms of fundraising, and we'll also then roadmap how you can plan to succeed at those different forms of fundraising and how you can be most effective in putting your time into those different aspects. We'll let you know about opportunities for further support, but the focus today is really about how you can become more sustainable, how you can open up new income streams, how you can develop and engage supporter base, and also raise unrestricted funding, which can really help you cover running costs or capital requirements. And those are all elements that are really relevant to both community shares and online fundraising. So whichever element that is that you've tuned in for today, then it should be really relevant to you, and it'll be really helpful for us to look through that all together.
So to introduce the Wales Co-operative Centre, the Wales Co-operative Centre was set up in 1982 following the trade union movement to help people in Wales to set up cooperatives and stimulate the local economy. Since then we've grown and we're a broader development agency. So what does that mean? Well, at the minute it means that we deliver a number of different projects funded by different organisations. Included in that is Community Shares Wales, which I work on and which supports community share offers. Social Business Wales, which more broadly provides support, advice and guidance to social enterprises all over Wales. We run Digital Communities Wales, which helps tackle the issue of digital inclusion across Wales. Care to Cooperate, which supports health and social care cooperatives to be set up. And Communities Creating Homes, which is all about community-led housing. So our emphasis is all around supporting people within Wales to make Wales a fairer and stronger place.
And Local Giving is a UK-wide not-for-profit. Anybody across the UK that is a not-for-profit can sign up to our online fundraising platform. We specialise in helping those that are small and medium-sized charitable groups. In Wales, there's a specific programme of additional support, which I'll go into in a minute. But essentially, we strengthen UK communities by safeguarding the sustainability of the local voluntary sector. There's a real emphasis on community groups, and we offer tools and training and advice to make it as easy as possible for groups to start fundraising online, to improve their digital skills, and to develop real practical fundraising experience. And we've raised over £24 million so far for over 6,000 members across the UK, and that does include match funding opportunities and grant opportunities as well. In July 2016, we launched a specific Wales programme. Initially, that was for 250 groups to explore online fundraising. In the last 2 years, we've then opened that up to an additional 100 groups, and so there are over 350 groups in Wales now that are accessing free support, a whole free year of help with online fundraising. That involves face-to-face training where we go and meet them wherever they're based, and also a specific Wales match fund to really help them get started. But the first step of any online fundraising journey is to create a donation page, as is exampled on the right, where groups explain what their work is as a whole, and it gives their network the means to donate to them by one-off donations or monthly donations, and we'll talk about other forms of fundraising pages that they can set up as well.
So we're going to pick up the webinar by going through some success stories of community shares and what community shares are. We're going to start with a quick question that will appear on your screen. Have you ever heard of community shares? So this should have appeared on your screens. You'll be able to vote, and if you click submit, we'll be able to see the overall responses from the group. This is just a quick question to see whether people have heard of community shares. Sorry, Judy, we'll try and talk a little louder. Okay, thanks for that. So we can see that we've got a real mixture of people in the room, which is useful for me to know the level of detail to go into. So we'll move back to the slides now. which should appear again on your screen. So we're going to start with looking at what are community shares. Community shares are specific to the legal structure of cooperative and community benefit societies. In terms of the technical information, which I will just start with before I run through case studies, the first thing to know is it's one member, one vote. So it's an entirely democratic model, and it creates genuine community ownership because of that. It means that no matter how much money someone has put in, they have one voting right in the organisation. So it doesn't matter if Mr. Jones has put in £50 in shares and Mrs. Williams has put in £1,000, they both have equal voting rights. The other key factor is that the shares don't change in value. So people are investing because they want to support the venture, not because they are speculating that they could make a financial gain. Interest can be paid on shares, and it's in recognition of the risk of the investment. So usually an organisation will pay between 2 and 5% interest on the shares that they issue to the community. However, this is always in the control of the board of the organisation, and it's only ever paid if the business can genuinely afford it. So you do have that protection as an organisation. And most societies have an asset lock, which means that the investment is put into the organisation is held for the community. It means if the business is wound up, after any debts and liabilities are paid, if there is money left over, it has to go to another similar organisation. It means that money going into the organisation will never end up being distributed by the shareholders. Shareholders can be repaid the amount they invested, but they'll never get any further funds. It's a patient form of funding and it's flexible. By that, I mean that it's a long-term investment, and it's up to the society to say when and how they will repay shares. Most organisations state upfront that they will not start repaying investors until 3 to 5 years after they start trading, to allow them the time to ride the ups and downs of starting a new enterprise and wait until they're comfortably making a profit. That gives you a great advantage as an organisation. It's also unrestricted funding. So people who are used to working in the third sector and taking on funding will be used to restricted funding, where you can only spend the money you are given on a very specific purpose. With community shares, you have the flexibility to raise money for whatever you need to, as long as you are being clear from the start to investors about how you're going to use it. So it gives you that flexibility. I'll now talk through some case studies just to bring it to life as to how community shares can work practically. So my first case study is an organisation called Le Public Space, which is based in Newport in South East Wales. Le Public Space is a community-owned and operated arts venue and pub in Newport, where they have lots of live music acts and where they've really showcased and helped support new and emerging talent in the music scene. Now, Le Pub was run as a pub. It was run by manager Sam as a sole trader for almost 25 years, after which point they faced the loss of their building as it was put up for sale. In response to this, a number of community members came together, including staff from the pub as well as regulars or just people with an interest in the live music scene. They decided that not only did they not want to lose the pub, but they also had a vision that it could be a much bigger community space and could have a much greater impact. So as such, they came together, they formed a community benefit society, and they carried out a community share offer. They raised £50,000 from about 80 members, and that gave them the money they needed for the refurb costs and working capital to go into a new venue and start up again as a sort of phoenix from the ashes venture. Now, they only secured a 10-year lease, and I'm putting that in here because people who are familiar with raising capital funding will be aware that sometimes funders want to see a long-term lease. The reason it was okay for Le Public Space to raise £50,000 even though they only had a 10-year lease, is because they made it clear in their financial modelling and their business plan that they would be able to repay people over those 10 years. So it's always really important that you've got your plan as for how and when you can repay shareholders. The next case study I'm sharing is a completely different type of organisation. So Gower Regeneration is a cooperative based in Swansea, and it's Wales's first community-owned solar farm. So it's a 1 megawatt solar farm in the Gower Peninsula, and it generates enough electricity to power 300 homes. Now, they did a community share offer to refinance their project, by which I mean they had loan finance, which meant that they were able to construct the solar farm, and they then did a community share offer to refinance that loan. They were paying 9% interest on the loan and did a community share offer where they are paying 5% interest to shareholders. So there's an immediate cost saving, which means that more money is going to be ploughed into the community in Swansea. They did incentives for local investment. So they said that if you had a Swansea postcode, you could invest for a minimum of £50 worth of shares, whereas anyone outside of that region would have to pay £250. So this was all about making sure that local people really had that opportunity to get involved. As a result, they raised £906,000 through the community share offer, and that means that over the 20-year lifespan of the project, they're going to donate about £500,000 into the local community. So immediately you can see the strength of the community benefits that were created as a result of doing a community share offer. The next case study is a pub in North Wales called Taverna Helia, or the Sportsman, in a small town called Nevin. Nevin is on the Llŷn Peninsula. It's a very beautiful town which has a lot of second homes. It's a tourist town, and it's often very quiet when it's outside of the tourist season. Now, their high street had a lot of empty shops and closed down businesses and really felt like it was dying. When I first met with this group, they were looking at taking on a pub which had been closed for 9 years and was a real eyesore on the high street in that community. Their vision was that if they could take over the pub, set it up as a community venue, they could really turn around the community spirit in Nevin. They came together, they did the community share offer, and they raised £80,000 in shares. That was enough money that they were able to purchase the building. However, they didn't have the funds they needed to renovate the building, had that security. However, they've been able to raise the rest of the funding through a grant. So they've recently secured about £250,000 from the Welsh Government's Community Facilities Programme in grant funding. This is an example of how community shares can work really well as match funding, because they had demonstrated that local people wanted this enough that they were willing to put their hands in their own pockets and purchase shares. That gave them a really strong case in then going to funders to look for match funding. So this is a town with only 2,000 residents, and they had about 500 investors. You'll see on the screen, I've shared a picture of 2 mums from the town. I took this from their Twitter feed. So when they did their campaign, every time someone would invest, they would take a photo and they would share it on social media with a quote. So I've put in the quote for these 2 mums. They really wanted to invest so that they could create a Nevin where their children could stay and where it could be a small and thriving economy. Now, the other case study is a slightly different approach, and it's actually from Scotland, but I think it's a really interesting model. So Strontian Community School was created by the community of Strontian. Now, their local high school was declared no longer fit for purpose by the Highland Council. The only available solution was that it would have to be closed and families would have to send their children to the next town to go to school, which in a very remote community, such as in the Scottish Highlands, where transport links are not very strong, was going to prove a real challenge, especially throughout the winter months. The community came together and held a community meeting. And because the community share offer had already been done in the next village for a solar project, they realised that they would be able to use this model to save their school. They decided, well, if the problem is that the council doesn't have the funds to invest in the building, then why can't we create our own building? They came together, they did a community share offer, and they used that to raise some of the funding. They also did a crowdfund as well, so they used the two different approaches of online fundraising. They matched that with loan finance and a mixture of grant funding as well, and as such have been able to build their own school. The Highland Council agreed to a 15-year lease for this school, and they knew this from the outset, which means that they've got that steady income. They know they can cover their costs of having created this building. They also have designed it in a way that means that it can be really easily converted into housing, because another issue that was really strongly identified was access to affordable housing. So as you can see, they have the ownership of this building, they've got it secured for 15 years, they've saved the school provision, but if in 15 years the Highland Council doesn't want to renew the lease, they've got that flexibility. As you can kind of see from the picture, they can convert it and they can sell it on. So this is just another approach in which community shares and investment in a building can actually be used to save a service in a community. So I'm now going to run through the process of carrying out a community share offer, in which really there are 4 key elements which you need to get right. So those key elements are a mixture of a business model, where you're using the investment to grow the business, to generate income so that you can repay shares, even if that's over a long period of time. Building up the community around you. Ultimately, the community are the people that you're looking to invest. So if you don't have the backing and the support of the community, then your project won't proceed. The offer document, and that is your document, which I'll go through in a minute, where you set out all the terms of your community share offer, what you're going to do, how you're going to use the money, how you're going to repay people. And then your governing document, so that is making sure that you've got the right structure. I mentioned before that you're a cooperative society or a community benefit society, that you are legally able to issue shares. So I'll start with the process of rallying the community, which is very often the key starting point for developing a community share offer. The first thing you need to find out is whether or not the community really supports what you're looking to do. Maybe something is at risk of being lost to your community and people really want to save it. Or perhaps there's something new, there's a need in your community and you have an idea for something that you can create that will really help people. Make sure you find out, talk to your community. This can be your local community or it can be your community of interest. And there are lots of different ways to do that. So you often see a community meeting as a really good starting point for someone doing a community share offer. You can do surveys, you can talk to people, just any way in which you can get out there and you can check that you've got support. How can people support you? So people can either join the steering group and become a director of the organisation. If they're not in a position where they want to become a director of the organisation, they could still be involved, either as a committee member with specific skills that you can use and harness for your community share offer, or through other forms of volunteering. And for people who don't have that time but really, really do want to support what you're doing, then you're able to talk to them about how they can make an investment, buy shares, have a stake in the organisation and support it. Once you've done that, you need to know that behind the business is a viable business model. You need to make sure that the investment you're taking on from the community share offer is going to bolster the organisation and it's going to allow you to generate the income so that you can pay back all of these shareholders, as I said before, even if that's over a long time. It's also really important because this offer will be put out towards the public. People in your community will read it and they will challenge you. So you need to know and be comfortable asking their difficult questions about how you're making sure that you're putting as little risk on their money as possible. Now, it is always viewed as a long-term investment. Shares are usually held for a minimum of 3 to 5 years, at which point the organisations will gradually start repaying shares. So people need to understand that their investment will be held for a long time. Societies can pay interest on shares, but they don't pay dividends. So people are not going to get a cut of the profits of the organisation unless they've gone down the route of being a cooperative society. but for the vast majority of community share offers, particularly in Wales, shares get interest. So it's about understanding that your business can afford to pay that interest that you are offering. It's also important to understand why you're doing a community share offer and how that fits with your planned business model as well. So what would the role of having multiple community members, sometimes even hundreds of community members, having a stake in your business? What is that relationship going to look like? So for most organizations doing a community share offer, they've chosen this because they see the benefit of having members and shareholders who really have a stake in the business. There's lots of proof that if someone has invested in community shares, they are much more likely to become a volunteer or a user of a particular organization because they have that vested interest. So it's about really understanding what role that can play in your community's business model. Now, the next stage is the legal structure, as I've mentioned before. So there's two legal structures. You can either be a cooperative society or a community benefit society. And if you're a community benefit society, then you can apply to HMRC for exempt charity status. So the difference between these models is reasonably subtle. With a cooperative society, that is set up to benefit its members and exclusively its membership. As such, the profits made by the business are shared among all of the members, and that's called a dividend. So one example of an organisation that's done a community share offer and is a cooperative society is the Bell Inn in Bath. That is a pub and live music venue, and their profits are shared among their members, or they're used in a way that the members decide to use them. So they've got about 500 members, and that's the model that they've taken. For a lot of community share offers, we see the community benefit society model being used. The difference is just that it's about benefiting the wider community and not just the members. That means that profits can only be reinvested in the business or used for community benefit. The profits cannot go to the members through a profit share or dividend. However, some of the profits can be used to pay interest on shares to a maximum limit. Now, the charitable community benefit society means that if you've set up a community benefit society, but your objects are wholly charitable, then you can apply to HMRC to get the same tax treatment as being a charity. So it's not quite the same. You're not registered with the Charity Commission and you don't have a charity number, but it does mean that you get those same tax benefits of being a charity, such as being able to claim gift aid on donations. And it also means you can get that same access to funding and eligibility of being a charitable organisation. And finally, a really important part of the community share offer is the share offer document. So this is the one document where you set out your stall, you say what your story is, you share your vision for the organisation, and the reason you're asking the community invest, and the reason that you want them to get on board and be a shareholder and have that engagement with the organisation. You need to explain what being a shareholder will mean in terms of voting rights and in terms of how people will be able to engage in the organisation, as well as any terms and conditions that you're setting on the share offer. So any possible return on the investment, such as interest on shares, some information about possible tax relief that people may be able to get on their investment, the rate at which people will be able to get their money back. So that's share withdrawal. That's when people can take their money back, and any other frequently asked questions that you would have. This essentially becomes your legal contract with your shareholder. So it's really important that in this document, everything you're saying is backed up by your business plan, it's thought out, and it's a commitment that you have to stick to.
Brilliant. And now we're going to look at online fundraising, how that can work independently or collectively with community shares as well. Before we begin, we're just going to do a quick poll.
So this next question, I'm going to ask everyone, have you ever heard of online fundraising? Again, this question should pop up on your screen shortly, and you can quickly answer and then submit. And then after we've given you all a moment to do that, we'll share the results. So we're just seeing a few votes coming through.
Great to see that most people have heard of online fundraising and that a few people have used it before as well. We'll just share some of those votes with you. There we go. And then go back to the slides. Brilliant. So it's really important to be aware of why you should be fundraising online in the first place. It's a really relevant form of income to be familiar with and to explore, because 1/4 of all donations in the UK are now made online, and that equates to 2.4 billion every year. So it's it's really worthwhile to make sure that you're tapping into that as a form of income. And the average donation is naturally higher as well when it's made online, because technically people put their spare change in a donation bucket, but people always round up to the nearest £1 or £5 when they're donating online. And so in that sense, you can end up with having a higher income as well. It needs minimal resource. It's essentially unrestricted funding, and so it's not going to take too much of your time to be able to ensure that you've got flowing income for things like core costs and the basics that you need to keep your organisation running. The internet is used daily by a huge percentage of adults and by a lot of different age ranges as well. So in that sense, whoever you're working with, whatever community you're based in, it's a really relevant form of income for you to look at using. There are a lot of interesting stats out there around online fundraising. Nesta and the University of Cambridge recently surveyed over 450 organisations to look at why only 0.5% of the sector is actually making the most of crowdfunding. If it's got so many benefits, why are so few people actually using it? So with funding cuts and intrusive forms of fundraising being criticised, such as face-to-face, door-to-door, cold calling, all those sorts of things, then it's wondering why there's such a slow realisation of the benefits of crowdfunding when other sectors are using it, crowdfunding businesses. There's lots of other areas that are really making the most of this, but charitable organisations really aren't. The 2 out of 3 organisations, the main barrier was that they didn't have the knowledge, the skills, or the capacity for crowdfunding. And 90% of organisations had heard of it, but only 15% had used it. So there's obviously an awareness of it, but not the ability to be able to engage in that and make the most of that. And that was the main barrier that the survey really highlighted. Out of those who had used crowdfunding, 64% of them wouldn't have had the funding without that form of income. So it was really crucial to making a lot of projects actually happen. 27% of crowdfunding supporters also offered to volunteer for that project. So you're getting people really engaged and they're helping in other forms as well. 90% of donors promoted the project they supported via social media. So you're naturally raising awareness as you gather supporters as well. And crowdfunding raises money for specific projects rather than a cause as a whole. So in that sense, it's really transparent. People are really clear about where their money's going, which is why it makes sense to focus on it as a form of fundraising, because it can't be criticised in that sense, because people are really clear about what they're supporting and engaging with. And crowdfunding allows experimentation. So you might come up with an idea of how you want to address a particular issue, try fundraising against it, and then if people are donating towards that, they also agree that it is a really good idea of how to address that problem. So in that sense, it reduces the cost of failure, because you can gauge whether those around you also think your plans are worthwhile and likely to succeed as well before you've actually spent anything on them. In terms of other sorts of fundraising pages you can make, as I mentioned before, everyone makes an initial donation page when they sign up to Local Giving. That sums up the group's work as a whole. However, there are other forms of pages you can make as well. On the left, there are appeal pages, which are also called crowdfunders or campaigns. They're all interchangeable terms. Essentially, it means raising a large amount through lots of smaller donations made by a crowd of people. That's where the terminology comes from there. And so you'd set a target of, we need to raise £5,000 to continue this project for another year, or we need to raise £1,000 for a piece of equipment, or £2,000 to continue a piece of work that needs to, be more available over the summer holidays. Anything that you can put a rough figure on would work really well for an appeal, and it just adds that sense of urgency to enable you to really be able to make the most by encouraging people to support something very specific. You can add videos to appeal pages. You can edit the target and the amount of days that you're going. So it's very flexible, and it's not one of those platforms where you only get the donations at the end. If you successfully hit the whole target, you're still getting donations as they're flowing through. And so in that sense, you really know that your hard work is entirely worth it. Fundraiser pages, as many people as like at any time can do fundraisers for you. There's a Fundraise for Us button on your main donation page that people can click, and then they can set up their own fundraiser. That can be a challenge that they've chosen themselves, for a target that they've chosen themselves, and they can personalize those pages as much as they like with training videos and everything else. Appeals and fundraisers do always have a target. However, the main page doesn't have a target. It is essentially an ongoing donation facility. These pages are temporary pages, the appeals and the fundraisers. So the individual or you as a group set the amount of time that you want them to be active for, whereas your general page allows you to have a constant flow of funding, and it is essentially an open target, as it were, and individuals can't see exactly how much you've raised or not raised through that. With fundraiser pages, people can also link them to appeals, so they can increasingly add their target to your larger appeal target as well. And we give full training on how to make those pages and encourage people to take part in them. In terms of mastering the basics of fundraising online, obviously you can have the strongest donation page going, but you need to make sure that people know it's there and that you're contacting your supporter base and growing that supporter base in an effective way. It's really worth starting out by mapping out who your current network are. A lot of groups would say that they don't have a network, but everyone has people or groups of people that they interact with as an organisation. They might know about some of your work, they might know about all of your work, but it's really worth thinking about who is aware of what we do, and then thinking about what is the best message for each of those groups of people. Because it's really easy to send one blanket message asking everyone to donate, but you will know that some segments of your network, that's just not appropriate. It's much better to ask them to do a fundraiser for you instead, or to perhaps, just share a social media post when you're really pushing a particular campaign. So it's worth thinking about what's the best message for different people in your network. This is a case study of a group that began online fundraising from a point of never having done anything like this before. They had one guy who gave them 50 quid cash every other year or so. That was the only support they had from individuals. Essentially, online fundraising is individual giving, but it's primarily given online, raised through the internet. So in that sense, this organisation, they weren't very comfortable about asking for donations in the first place. They weren't sure what the response would be. In their first month, though, they began to ask for support, and they raised over £1,000 from 50 donations. So in that sense, they instantly began to realise that if you ask, you do get, and that was then their confidence boosted. The whole organisation engaged in training, and they divided up responsibilities to start promoting planning for their future fundraising. They fundraised through a lot of existing events, so they had a community cafe, which before they started fundraising in this way was very much surviving hand to mouth. They started to do things like have a volunteer at the back of the room and say, if you'd like to give a voluntary contribution towards the event today, our volunteer can help you to donate £2 towards the costs. And they slowly start fundraising through their free activities as well as through appeals and fundraisers as well. In terms of promoting your donation pages, obviously you need to be able to reach people, and different people can be reached in different ways. It's really worth making sure that your donation page is as strong as possible. You need to make sure that you really make it clear what it is that you do, why people should support you, how you best address the challenges that you've described, and what does the situation look at as a result of that funding. And the strongest donation pages always include a story or a quote or a testimony or something like that as well, to really bring to life what it is that you're doing. Monthly direct debits. All of your fundraising messages should include the option to support you monthly. It's really useful for you to know exactly how many people are giving to you each month. That's a block of income that can help towards your core cost then. The best direct debit requests are those that are, give a really clear idea of what the donations go towards. Some groups, it's really easy for them to describe what a monthly amount could equate to. Something like a food bank knows exactly how much it costs to feed a family of 4 for a month. A lot of other groups might struggle to put such a clear-cut figure on something, or come up with something that is a small enough amount to equate to a monthly donation. But for example, the group in the bottom right here, they help children in care access free boxing classes. They know that one direct debit couldn't equate to one free class, but they encourage people that that's where their donations go towards. So it's going towards helping that happen as well. In terms of starting to reach people, social media is obviously a really important one, and that's one that we look at closely with our members. It's really worth looking at how you currently communicate with people. A lot of groups we work with have a strong Facebook page, even if they don't have a website or an email list or anything like that. It's really important to make any social media posts visual. In that sense, you need to make sure you've got videos and photos attached to anything that you're communicating. There are many free resources out there that can help you have strong visual content if you don't have it to hand already. There are also great opportunities through things like Canva to be able to create really strong visual resources for free. We can support you with looking at things like that as well. Digital media is still well worth looking at. Digital media, we've had a lot of groups that come really well out of local press, for example, and the link on the page there does take you through to a local giving page that allows you to see a list of local press, and when you click on each name of each newspaper, it takes you directly to part of the website. You submit a newspaper article. So in that sense, it makes it really quick and easy to submit an article to 10 newspapers if you're going to the effort of submitting it to one, and that link can help you do that. Newsletters as well. 1/3 of online donations are because of an email, and so in that sense, it is really worthwhile looking at how you could set up a newsletter. As you start to get donations, then you will be gathering people's contact details as well if they're choosing to share their data with you. Data permission and data protection are all really simple through local giving, and so you can only access the contact details of those people that want you to access it. And in that sense, you could start to build a newsletter. That could just be once every 6 months. It doesn't have to be a burden, a monthly newsletter, but you can keep people up to date in that sense. And that's all fine there as well. In terms of engaging individual fundraisers, it's really important to give that a go. Fundraising is really worthwhile because people will support a loved one even if they won't give to the organisation as a whole, because if they're doing a challenge to raise money, it doesn't really matter whether their friends and family know the cause they've chosen, but they're more than willing to give a few quid towards their loved one taking on that challenge. On average, there'll be 16 new donors that will support each fundraiser. So in that sense, it's really worthwhile because it can help you reach new donors, and more people are learning about your work as they're donating as well. Group fundraisers are also really worthwhile considering. If people don't want the pressure of hitting one target by themselves, then that's absolutely fine. They can group together to come up with their own challenge and go from there. We do offer campaigns like Local Hero as well, which reward fundraisers who have high numbers of donors. There'll be more information on that if you're a local giving member, but essentially group fundraisers can help you win higher prizes through that as well, so they're well worth considering. In terms of different fundraising ideas, there are a few different ways that you can encourage people to go. One of those is existing third-party events, all of the big runs and cycles and all of those sorts of things that people can independently sign up to themselves, and they create a fundraiser page for those. That's great, and that's minimal effort for you as well. The other option is that they could come up with their own fundraising idea. That is really beneficial for those who maybe don't want to have any cost output for signing up to a fundraiser, or they couldn't get to an existing event, or they're just not interested in physical activities like that either. Anyone can come up with their own fundraising idea, as small as a coffee morning to a big year-long challenge, and set up their own fundraiser page with their own target and aims there as well. On the right here is an example of a Wales group that won Local Hero recently with a supporter-led fundraiser. Basically, someone decided they wanted to cycle around all of the venues across Wales that the disabled theatre group had performed in that year. And so it was a challenge, but it was also a challenge that was specific to the group they were raising money for as well. The third option is that you could come up with your own fundraising event. If you do this, you need to make sure it's something that's relevant and it's something that doesn't take up a lot of your time. And in that sense, we can work with you to come up with an idea that fits in naturally with something you're already doing. It's not taking a week of your life up to plan, and also it's something that maybe your volunteers are doing anyway, and so it's a really good fit. One of the best things you can do if you're coming up with your own ideas is to get people to vote on what idea is their favourite, so that before you put any time into it, you know it's something that is of interest. There's two example fundraisers here. So the Paul Popham Fund, they essentially work with children, and they encourage parents to do fundraisers, fund the work. They encourage parents to do 12 challenges in 12 months. They do one of those challenges all together, and then parents can pick and choose whatever they want to do for the other 11 challenges. So something like that works really well, and they keep tapping away at their target throughout the year. Recovery Cymru, they did something really interesting that anyone could really replicate. They worked out that it cost them £300 to give someone a day of help when they really needed it. And so they let people know when they come through their services, you know, this is how much it costs. Would you like to raise £300 for someone else to access that day of help when they really need it? And then they had all these fundraiser pages that had £300 as their target, a really clear explanation of why they had to raise every pound of that. And it really validates the fundraiser, because not only are they saying, look, I'm doing this challenge to raise money, they're also saying, I'm making this specific thing happen as well. And so you, as donors, when you're supporting fundraisers, have a really clear output, and it strengthens that fundraising message as well. As well as trying fundraisers near the start of your fundraising journey, it is really worth also planning your first campaign or appeal or crowdfunder. There are a few things to bear in mind when you're doing that. One of those is your appeal target. That's a very common question we get asked. I usually recommend that it's not worth doing an appeal for any less than £500, because you really want it to be worth your time. And honestly, you'll reach that first £500 relatively quickly as well. And so it's worth being a little bit ambitious and setting that as a minimum. For your first appeal, I recommend not setting a target higher than £5,000. And that's because you'll learn a lot from your first appeal, so you don't want to set anything too challenging. And also, it really engages as many people as possible then. Because if I'm someone that can only afford to give you £5 and you've set a 20 grand target, then it really makes me feel, you know, my £5 is going to make no difference there. There is also something called the 30% rule, which is that if you pretty much raise the first third of your target, then you are likely to get the whole way. And so in that sense, it's really worth having a really strong start and getting off that £0 mark as quickly as possible as well. There are a couple of different ways you can do that. One is that you can raise offline donations, so a grant that you've had towards the same thing, or a recent cash donation that's instantly noted on your target bar, and it never says £0. The other option is that you could do something called a soft launch as well, where you essentially let people know that your donation page has been made live, and you encourage your volunteers and those closest to you and previous donors to donate in that first week. For the following week, you do a public launch and start to let people on social media know, etc. And hopefully between you all, you've raised the first chunk of the money. But as per the rest of the slide here, it's really worth planning ahead to fit it into any existing dates or awareness days or other funding opportunities, and to work out the skills that other people in your organisation have that could help you along. This is one example of a group, one of our members in Wales, that did an appeal to raise money for a new wildflower garden, and they kept 3 public parks going in Swansea, and they really weren't comfortable with anything online really, So they had their online donation page, but they wanted to do a lot of their promotion offline as well, and that also fitted in with their age demographic. They did things such as put articles in local press, they did posters around the park, they spoke to employers who might have employees that would want to come and enjoy the garden on their lunch break. They spoke to the local councillor, and he included something in his update, and also covered their costs for things like flyers that they put in their bags in their plant shops. So they did a lot of traditional promotional methods, and so they raised a huge amount offline, as well as £4,000 through their online appeal. And so in that sense, we can really work with organisations to raise money however they feel comfortable, and it really works for groups no matter what their demographic or prior experience as well. You can look for groups that are similar to yourselves in local giving, if you want to see what they're up to and possibly replicate their ideas. There is also a YouTube channel for local giving, which is where this webinar will end up as well, but I'll share a link with everyone in the next couple of days too, but the link is there on the side for you. In terms of actions, if you'd like to start online fundraising, it's really worth having a look at what platform you might want to use. Some very large charities have online donation facilities on their website, and because they're very large and they drive a lot of traffic to their website anyway, that is enough for them. But the majority of medium and small charities, that just isn't enough, and you really need to be doing proactive fundraising and proactive campaigns, and drawing your network to those donation facilities. It is possible to add a donate button to a website that still links to your local giving pages. So all of that can be really smooth and inclusive in what you're already doing. So in terms of first actions, it's really key to sign up to a platform of your choice, create that donation page and make it really strong and have donate buttons in place. Decide what you'd like to fundraise for first, whether you have particular ideas for campaigns or encouraging fundraisers. Prepare a thank you message so you're ready to go as soon as you start getting donations. And then also make the most of any training or awareness opportunities that you have along the way as well. So just to do another quick poll, we're just going to ask you a couple of true or false statements. There we go, it should be up on your screen now. So if you could just take a minute to have a look at both of these and give your answers. True or false, community shares are only suitable for affluent communities. True or false, online fundraising is only suitable for organisations working with young adults. Okay, brilliant, that's the majority of people voting, so I'll share those results with you now. There we go. So thank you to everyone there that did the correct answers, much appreciated. And then going back to the slides, we'll move on to our next section.
So we're going to look at road mapping to success and the key principles which apply to both online fundraising as well as community shares fundraising. So if we go into the next slide, the key building blocks to engage your organization's community or community of interest, first of all, is identifying a need, identifying what your specific need or cause is and what you're looking to do, working out how much funding you need to raise and how this is going to have a broader impact on your organization. Then there's your community engagement, making sure that you are warming up the community and that you're getting close supporters near you to help foster engagement. So if you can get people who are already early adopters, really supportive of what you're doing involved, so that the second you launch your campaign, they are ready to make their donation or make their investment, that will put you in a really strong position going forward to show that there's momentum. There's making sure that you're making a strong case. So having a really clear donation page with a clear call to action, or having a really strong case on how the investment you're looking for through community shares is going to have a big impact on the organisation. You have to think about planning and strategy. So think about how this fundraising fits into your widening funding strategy, whether you're going to use it as match funding to lever in grant funding or loan finance, by showing that you've got really strong community backing and that you've de-risked the project by taking on some early funds from the community, that you whether you're looking to repay over time and how that's going to work in terms of your community share offer or your online fundraising campaign. Thinking about the marketing and promotion. So for all of these, it's good to have a time-bound campaign so that you're able to keep up momentum, so that you're realistic about your own capacity as a group to keep on promoting the campaign and pushing it out there. And also having a deadline can be a really effective tool to draw people to actually sit down, go online and make their donation or make their investment. So really use that to be realistic about what you can achieve. And then finishing well. So make sure that you celebrate what you've achieved and that you share information with the people who have supported you, making sure that you're taking their contact details so that you can go back to them, you can keep them updated, you can thank them for their support, and you can signpost them to how they can get involved going forwards, whether that would be volunteering, being a member or a shareholder who's engaged, otherwise getting involved in the project, or even potentially backing another campaign in the future. As you can see, those are steps that work really well with both online fundraising and community shares. So in that sense, you could be planning 2 campaigns together, encouraging community shares for the same project as you were doing an appeal for through online fundraising. Both those different asks will appeal to different people, because you can be doing your community shares ask, where the minimum community share might be something like 50 quid, which is still accessible to a lot of people. But you could also be doing an online fundraising appeal alongside that to raise a portion of the money for people that can only give you £2 or £5 as well. And so you're giving absolutely everyone in the community an opportunity to support you. We're going to have another quick question now. We're going to ask everyone where you are on your support journey and what you need. So that should come up on your screens now, and you should be able to actually type in your answers to this question. So we'll just give you a few moments for everyone to be able to quickly answer. We're just looking for short answers so that we can get an idea of how we can support you.
Thank you. A couple of answers in already there. Appreciate it takes a bit of time to type, so we'll give you a bit longer there. Okay, just 10 seconds more. Okay, and then just submit anything else you've got. There we go, I'm going to end voting now. Okay, brilliant, and we'll have a look at that and we'll get back to you with anything that you've said in those comments. Thank you very much.
That's great. So now we're just going to summarise the opportunities for further support that you can access. So going forward, if you've been inspired by this webinar and you think that either of these options are something you want to look at, then we can assist you. So through the Wales Co-operative Centre, if you're looking to do a community share offer, then you can access support through our Community Shares Wales programme. The support is quite flexible and can enable you to go through all the key steps along the process of doing your community share offer, whether that's just giving you advice and helping you to scope whether the offer is right for you, whether to look at the people around you and if you've got skill sets that you need, assisting you with actually developing and creating the share offer, as well as reviewing your documents and even awarding the standard mark if you would like to go through that process. And in terms of Local Giving's Wales Development Programme, we have filled all of the existing 350 free spaces, but we have an ongoing promotion where we can give Wales organisations 50% off membership.
In that sense, there is information on our website, or just feel free to get in touch with contact details, which are at the end. The offer does vary across times, depending on how soon afterwards you're listening to this. Just get in touch and we can let you know the latest opportunity. Essentially, a lot of it evolves around training and support, so we can really meet you and help you make the most of online fundraising, and be able to get off to a really strong start and succeed with that as a portion of your income. The other ongoing benefit to mention are that we are able to give all of our members gift aid, whether they're registered charities or not. So in that sense, community groups that have never accessed gift aid before can really benefit from that. And also we give regular opportunities throughout the year through match funding, grants and prizes. So in that sense, there are a number of ways where you can be receiving additional funding to what you would, if you weren't doing this at all, or if you were doing this elsewhere. And we're a not-for-profit ourselves. Everything we do goes entirely towards helping organisations to raise money.
So we're just going to summarise with a last couple of questions now, just to get a sense of how you will found the session. So we're going to ask you, do you feel more confident approaching online fundraising and or community shares? And have you found this webinar helpful and informative? As we say, we will share a recording afterwards so that you can use this again, or you can share it with others. So we'll just give you just a few moments to complete that close-ended questions, so quite quick. Okay, that's great. Thanks very much for voting. I'm glad to see that people feel that they've gained something from this session. That's what we like to hear. So we're going to finish up the webinar now. Thank you so much for everyone who has joined. We're going to stop the recording now, and then we'll stay online so that we can answer